What's up YouTube, and welcome to another draw along with me. Today's design is this lovely sunset where we've got these two elephants making their way around this waterbed. As always, there's a link in the description down below to follow along with the exact same palette, as well as links to all the different brushes you're going to need for this design. If you're new here, I post Procreate content every single week, so hit that subscribe button down below and turn on the notification bell. And as always, a huge shout out to my patrons. I'll throw their names up on the screen now. If you'd like some exclusive tutorials that are exclusive to patrons, as well as access to our Facebook group and our future Discord, hit that link in the description down below and show your support over there. And with all that said, let's get started. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create a new canvas, and as always mine is going to be 2500 by 2500. Now once we're in, let's draw in the ground layer here for the scene. So let's go to our layers and we'll have an empty layer to start on. So let's use that. And let's go to our brush library and then let's go to calligraphy. We're going to use our trusty monoline brush. And then for this, you can increase your brush size just so you can see it. But we're going to draw a horizontal line across the screen and hold our pen at the end to get a nice perfectly straight line. And if we go up to our colors for today's palette, we're going to use this color here in the top left hand corner, and that will be our foundation color for that back layer. And then let's draw in our horizontal line roughly a third up from the bottom and hold your pen at the end to get a perfectly straight line. And if you put your finger on the screen, you'll also get a perfectly horizontal line in increments of I think about 15 degrees. So once you're good, just drop your color then into the bottom half, and we've now got our ground layer for the scene. And now that's done, we can go ahead and add in our gradient layer. So let's create a new layer. Let's drag that one underneath our land, as we want it to only affect the sky in the background. And then we're going to go to our brush library. We're going to go to airbrushing and we're going to use our soft brush. And this can be fairly large, probably around about 80% will be sufficient. And let's go to our colors. And then we're going to use these sets of colours here, the nice warm tones for our sky in the background. So first of all, let's grab this red and let's just simply drag and drop that onto the screen. Now that will have filled the entire layer with that colour, and then we can go ahead and add the other colours for the gradient. So then if we go back to our colours and we switch it out to the orange, the second colour on the second row. And then let me just test out the brush, probably a little bit big. Let's go down to about 60% just so we've got some more control. And you're just going to want to just go from left to right up the screen until you leave a little bit of that red at the very top there. And just making sure it's nice and even, hence going left to right. And don't worry about your gradient and your blending so much, we'll blur that out shortly. And then let's go to our colours and let's switch to the yellow next. And then again, but only going up to where the orange sort of ends. We're just going to go from left to right until we add in a nice little bit of yellow at the bottom here in our sunset. And then the very last thing we'll do is we'll add in this bright yellow here into the very center. So I'm going to select the fourth color on the palette and I'm going to reduce my brush size down to about 30%. And in a circular motion in the center, just add in a little bit more of a glow just towards the center here, which our sun will be sort of shining from. Now that's our gradient. Now if you're not happy with your blending, all you've got to do is simply go to your adjustments. Then we'll use the Gaussian blur and the layer version. And at the top, you'll see if I slide from left to right, I'll get a percentage bar. And if I go all the way to the extreme, backwards and forwards, you can see that it blurs the layer to different degrees. So we're going to blur mine roughly around about 25%, just so I get a very nice, smooth and easy transition there. So now that that's done, we can go ahead and add in our sun. So let's go to our layers. Let's create a new layer. And then let's go to our brush library. And then we want to switch it to calligraphy and use the monoline brush. And don't worry about your brush size, it's not really necessary. And then in our color palette, we're just going to select the white here, slightly off white. So it's the fifth color on the second row. And then all we're going to do is simply draw a circle somewhat in the middle of the screen. Hold your pen at the end to get a perfect ellipse. And if you put your finger on the screen, you'll get a nice perfect circle. And we want to go for something around about that size there. You can drag and drop our colour in, and then we filled that in nicely. And then let's grab our cursor And with snapping turned on, as always, we'll get the horizontal and vertical lines to let us know where we are on our canvas, but we only really want to focus on the one straight down the middle. And I'm just going to drag mine down until we sort of get just that sort of semicircle at the top there, like so. And now we can create the little beams that come off of the sun. So let's go to our layers now. And I do this quite frequently. I swipe the layer to the left-hand side and duplicate that layer. And then on the second one, we're going to lower the opacity down to roughly, let's go down to 10%. That's typically the golden number for this for me. And then I'm going to go to my cursor icon. And with the uniform option selected, which will increase the shape of this object, but in the same proportions, we're just going to increase that circle. And then we're going to just position it until we get the orange line straight down the middle, but also the blue line through the middle as well here, roughly slightly lower than that sort of landscape here, which lets us know that this circle is running exactly the same sort of area as the circle we had before. So it's like perfectly centered to that circle for the sun. And that's the first one done, and we're going to do 3 of that. So we're going to swipe then this layer to the left hand side and duplicate it. Again, on the second one at the 2, we don't need to lower the opacity because it'll already be at 10. We can grab our cursor and we can expand the size of this again. And you want to increase the size so that every time it increases, it's roughly the same gap. So that's good with me. And then I'm going to do it a 3rd time. So we're going to swipe that layer to the left hand side and hit duplicate. On the second one, we're going to then go to our cursor. Let's increase the size of that circle. Make sure we get the orange line straight down the middle. And then probably I can go a tiny bit bigger. And we're good like that. So now we've got a nice radiating glow there from our sun. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use the smudge tool now just to sort of disperse our sort of layers a little bit so they're not so much solid shapes. So we're going to go to the smudge tool, and then if we tap on it again, we can get the options of which brush to use, because you smudge using the same selection of brushes that you've got in your brush library. And under painting, we're going to use the dry brush, and the brush size is currently set to around about 10%. And for each one of these 4 layers for the sun, we're just going to smudge it out ever so slightly and then disperse that solid line. So I'm just going to rotate my canvas a bit easier so I can go from left to right. And that's all you want to do. You just want to go from left to right, following the edge of the circle. So we're currently on the biggest circle. And going again, left to right, left to right, left to right. You'll slowly disperse the edge of that circle like that. If I zoom in, especially over here, you can somewhat see the sort of lines being nicely sort of smudged backwards and forwards, and we get that nice sort of sunset look. We're going to do that for all the layers going down, so then we're going to switch back in our layers and go to then the next circle up and turn it on and off just to be sure which layer it is. So we're on the next semicircle inwards, and then we're going to go left to right, horizontal in the design, and just smudge those edges out like so. You just want to create that nice sort of shimmering sunset look. And then once you've done that one, we can then repeat it for then the next circle. So turn that on and off just to be sure. So this is the closest one to the actual sun. And again, just smudging the outer edge left to right. And you can see I'm only really pushing it as far as then the circle that's behind it as well. And then finally, we'll just smudge the sun ever so slightly as well. So we're going to go to the final circle now. Until we end up with a nice shimmering sunset, and we've sort of given our lines a little bit more sort of movement in there. Let's add in some stars while we're here and still working on it. So let's create a new layer. And then in the description, there was a link to the stipple brush. So we're going to go to our brush library and we're going to find the stipple group. And then once we're in the stipple collection, we're going to go and use the light one, which is my favorite, and then reduce the brush size to, let's go smaller than that. Let's go about 40%, and then just tap in the sky and it will drop some nice random dots. And we just want to add a few just mainly towards the top. You don't want to add too many as well, so I'm going to reduce it down to about 15% and just add a few just towards the top, just to add in some extra context that this is a nice sunset for the evening. And now we'll add in some clouds. So let's create another new layer. And then for this layer, we're going to go to our brush library. We're going to use the calligraphy section again, and we're going to scroll down to the bottom until we find the script brush. And our clouds are going to use somewhat the same palette as the sky in the background. So we're going to go to our colors, and we're going to use this color here in the middle. Now this red will act as the shadow, and this yellow will act as the highlight. So if we select this orange here in the center, and then zoom in on this left hand side, what I liked to do in this particular design was create a sort of little flick. Now, if you can't see it, by all means, let's turn down the gradient or even turn the gradient off. But we can go to our layers and we can go to the gradient layer and just tone it down until we can see our lines, and then we can turn it back up shortly afterwards. And now you can see the S shape that I created for the base of the cloud. And now what we want to do is we just want to create our nice little flicks in the sky, and then we can fill it in with the highlight and shadows afterwards. So you start at one end and you simply create that sort of shape there. So it's almost like a wave. So you go up and then flick it sort of round on itself. And again, let's create another one. And then when you're done and you're happy with your cloud, you simply just make that extra little flick just to meet up to the line underneath. And then you may have to just link them up again. Because all we're trying to do is just create a solid shape so that we can drag and drop our color in. And then a little tip here, you have the color drop threshold at the very top. If you go too far, it will fill and spill out onto the layer, but you can tone it down as well to the left hand side just to fill the gap. And that's one cloud I've got up there already done. Let's create another new layer for one more cloud over on this right hand side. Now this one I'm going to create a longer variation. Something like that. We start at this end and we create a nice little flick. And then we're going to create another one. So this one stayed somewhat in the middle. And I'm going to just do exactly the same process and just flick outwards and then link my shape together till we end up with a shape such as that. And then we can drag and drop the color in like so. And then you may have to go in, just like I'm going to have to, and just touch up this edge here like so. Just erase part of it. And then I end up with these nice fluffy clouds in the sky. What we can then do is let's position them both. So I'm just going to move one slightly lower down into this area here. And this one here can maybe come down in size and also slightly off to the left. So that's the base of our clouds. We're then going to go ahead and add in the highlights and shadows on them. So we're going to, and what we'll do is, because they're simple shapes, we'll simply tap on the layer and use the option of alpha lock. So I'm currently working on the left cloud now, the first one that we started on. And if we go back to our colors and we switch it out to the red, we want to highlight the top of the cloud with that red color to act as the shadow. And what we want to do is we just want to somewhat follow the top line of this design, anything that faces upwards essentially, and then just add in some nice little red highlights in there. So I'm just going to stroke like that and create the top edge, and then likewise I'm just going to create a nice little flick just for the top here as well. And now you can nicely link up your colors like that and your lines and create some nice rounded wave looking shadows on the top here. And be bold. This one here, for example, you could go ahead and add in a nice little flick somewhat like that. And likewise, let's add in a nice little flick here too. So everything facing upwards now has a nice, lovely red shadow to it. And now let's go to our colors and switch it out to the highlight color, which is the yellow. And now all you want to do is simply follow the S shape here of the bottom of the cloud and go inside the cloud a little bit more. So you can see my line, it follows the same sort of curvature, but it makes its way inwards slightly here, which just means that nicely we can fill in this gap here with some extra highlight and just add some nice little lumps in there and nice bolder parts such as we did up here. And then we end up with a nicely shadowed and highlighted cloud in the sky. So while we are still using the highlighter color, let's go back to our layers. Let's tap on the other cloud, and let's also turn on the alpha lock for this one. And let's continue to highlight first. And I'm going to again just follow that S shape down, fill in the lower part again, like so. And then I'm going to switch it out to the red in the second row, first color. And then again, follow then the top edge for our shadows. So something like that. Nice little flick. Again, we can nicely get away with creating some nice curves here because of the way the cloud's been drawn, and curve that in a little bit more. And I could even wrap that round into there like so. And then also just cover this top edge. Maybe come inwards again a little bit more. I'm trying to be a little bit bold with where our sort of shadows are going, and fill in any gaps. And then when we pinch out with 2 fingers, we've got another cloud in the sky, nicely coloured in. And again, once we go back to our layers now, and we go back to the gradient, if you did turn it down, if you tap on the N and then increase the opacity, they nicely blend in somewhat with our colour palette for the background. And then what you can also do is you could go to that layer for the clouds, and first of all we could pinch them together if we're happy with them both. And then we can also lower the opacity down as well if we really want them to really blend into that night sky and not stick out too much. So we're going to drop them both down to about 40%, and then we get some nice softer looking clouds that are not too distracting from the rest of the design. And now that that's done, we can now focus on the ground layer here. So if we go up to our layers, we want to go to the ground layer itself. Let's create a new layer. Let's tap on that layer and make sure it's a clipping mask. And now we're going to go to our colors, and then we're going to go to our colors here on the top row. Now this is the color we used for the background, so we're going to use this second color now. And we're going to start adding in some glows that slowly get larger as we get closer to the sun. So if we go to our brush library now and we go to painting, we're going to use the brush Tama. And the brush size is set to about 13%. And now on this layer, we want to somewhat reflect sort of the same sort of shape as this sun, because it creates a nice catching look to the design. So we're going to start in the center, and in a circular motion, just build up the color very lightly, very, very lightly to start with. And we could even increase our brush size to about 20% if we wanted to. And we're just creating sort of circular motions until we somewhat reflect like a full circle of glow in this sort of ground here. Don't worry about the center too much. It's more so this area that we're focusing on. Just adding in a lovely little glow onto the ground and just creating that ground texture and also color. So I'm just going backwards and forwards, and you'll end up with something like that. And I could maybe add in a little bit here and a little bit over here too. And then you should end up with something roughly around about that. And you'll end up with a nice sort of glow here towards the bottom. We're going to go to our layers. I'm going to create another new layer. We're going to tap on that layer and also make it a clipping mask. Then we're going to switch our color out to then the third color on the top row. And then we're just going to go backwards and forwards in a, again, sort of circular motion, but aiming more towards the center this time, not going too wide. Probably reduce your brush size back down to 14% and just creating a little bit more color just towards the center. And then we end up with this nice sort of earthy, patchy look to it in full. And now we can go ahead and add in our sort of scene with our animals and trees. So now if we go to our layers, let's create a new layer at the very top. And this doesn't need to be clipped now. And then we're going to go to our brush library, and as mentioned in the description, there is a link to this free African sort of collection of stamps. And we're going to use, straight off the bat, we're going to use tree number 4. And we're going to go to our colors, and I'm going to switch the color out to this color here in the bottom right hand corner. So 5th one in on the 3rd row. And with our tree, let's make our brush size about 40%. And let's tap on the screen to stamp our brush, and that's actually a pretty good size. You could actually make that slightly bigger. And we're just going to position this for the moment over here on the left hand side, something roughly around about that. Then let's also create another new layer, and we're going to stamp in another tree. We're going to use this dead tree number 1. By all means, experiment with the different trees if you wish. I'm going to stamp that on the screen. Now this one will be fairly large, so let's reduce the size of that down until it doesn't overshadow in terms of size the one on the left hand side. And I'm going to position that for the moment roughly here. And let's go to our layers. Let's create another new layer. Let's go to our brush library and let's add in rock number 2 here. And the brush size, it can be any size, we can scale it down, but I'm going to just tap it roughly around about 40%. Now that's quite large obviously, so let's go to the cursor, scale that down till it's quite small, and something, I might even position mine quite close to the tree there. And now we could go to our layers and let's swipe that layer to the left and duplicate it, and then just grab your cursor and let's drag it over to the other side, but scale it down and position it in its own space, something like that. And now let's add in our elephants. So as mentioned, there's 2 free brushes that I've put together for you in the description as well for these. So there should be elephant brush 1 and 2. Once imported, you can then go to your brush library and find the brush. Typically they might be at the very bottom in imported, but they should otherwise be in a collection called Procreate. And in that group, we're going to use elephant number 1 to start with. We're going to create a new layer. And then we're going to make the brush size, let's go for roughly around about 20% and maybe scale them down. And that's much too large, so we can go to our cursor now and just scale this elephant down until we're happy with the proportions. And we need to leave a gap because we're going to add in our water here in a sec. So I'm going to position mine and something around about there is pretty good and size wise. And I'm going to go to my layers again. Let's create another new layer for our other elephant. So we're going to go to our brushes and use elephant number 2. Let's increase the size to, again, roughly about 20% and scale down. And then let's grab the cursor and scale this down until we're happy with the position. And I'm also going to flip mine horizontal so they're sort of making their way in the same direction. And I'm going to position this one so it's slightly smaller. And something like that I'm happy with. So now let's add in the water here, and then we can add in our shadows as well. So let's go to our layers. Let's then scroll down to where we had the sort of ground layer and the 2 mud layers that we created. Let's create another new layer above that and tap on that layer and go to clipping mask. And we're going to go to our colors and we're going to select then the sort of off-white here. So 5th color on the 2nd row. I'm going to go to our brush library and we're going to switch it back out to our monoline brush. So scroll down to calligraphy and then scroll back up to monoline. And we're just going to draw in a sort of water bed here. So I'm going to reduce my brush size roughly down to about 5%. And I'm just going to draw in a sort of squiggly sort of water bed here, just like so. And trying to make sure it's nice and symmetrical to the middle of the design. And then also go all the way around your canvas until you link up, so you can drag and drop your colour in. And now we've got this layer here, we want to somewhat reflect some of the colours in the sky. So let's go to that layer and let's tap on it and use the option of alpha lock. Let's go to our colours. Let's first of all drag and drop the red colour on the 1st colour on the 2nd row into that space. And then let's go to our colors and go to then the orange on the 2nd row, 2nd color. Go to our brush library and use the airbrushing, and we want to sort of create that gradient but within this area here. So we need to make our brush size quite small, roughly down to about 10%, and just add in some orange here. And don't worry if we get rid of most of the red, I'm happy that there be mainly orange and yellow, to be honest. Leave a slither of red towards the edges. And then also go to our colors and switch it to then the yellow. And then left to right, just sort of add in some color there. And then also let's add in some real strong glow as well. So let's select then the 4th color and just towards the center, just where the sun is, just add in that little glow in the center there. And then on that layer, let's actually just reduce the opacity down, and if we make it something quite light and somewhat down to roughly about 20%, 25%, we should end up with a nice sort of subtle sort of waters area here, and it's not too punchy and distracting. And the final touches here is to add in all the shadows for all the different layers. So we're going to go to all of these stamps that we created here at the top, and each one individually just duplicate it, flip it, blur it, and lower the opacity down. So let's go to this tree here on the left hand side. Let's swipe that one to the left hand side and duplicate it. And then on the second one, we're going to grab our cursor, we're going to flip it vertically and then drag it down into position so that the base of the tree touches the base of the other tree. And then using the distort tool, grab this handle here and then drag it off until we get the direction of the sun in the right direction. So as you can see from my pen, that's where my tree needs to point to. So I just need to sort of drag that out and then reattach the base of the shadow to the base of the tree. And then if I tap off that, you can now nicely see my shadow. We can now simply go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer, and then swipe from left to right until we get that progress bar at the top. And all we want to do is just blur it out ever so slightly, roughly about 3.6% for me. And then tap on adjustments and you're done. And now what I did in my design is I will go to my layer for the shadow, I'll tap on it and I'll use the option of mask. And then we get a nice white mask. So a white mask means that we're still showing 100%. So anything in white you're still showing, but anything you paint now in black you can hide. So black hides and white reveals. So if I now make sure I'm on the mask by tapping, to make sure we're on the darker version. If I go to my colors and I double tap at the bottom to select black, and then continuing with the soft airbrush, I am simply just going to soften out this left hand side edge and just fade that shadow out ever so slightly on that left hand side, so it fits in with my sort of design really. And that's the tree done, and we'll essentially repeat that process then for all the other layers as well. So let's take a look at our layers, and the next one up is the tree on the right hand side. So let's swipe that one to the left hand side and duplicate that. On the second one, we simply go to our cursor, we flip it vertically, we drag it down until the base of the tree in this instance matches up to this tree. And then we use this handle here to just angle our shadow based on where the sun is shining, and then just drag it so that the base of our tree matches up to the base of our shadow. And then the same principles then also apply. We simply go to our adjustments, we go to Gaussian blur and layer. If we swipe from left to right, we can blur that out ever so slightly and keep the percentages roughly the same, so 3.1% I'm happy with. Tap on adjustments when we're done. And then for me, I just want to blur out this edge ever so slightly and soften it. So I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to tap on the layer for the shadow. I'm going to mask it. And then on the mask, with the airbrush still selected, the soft brush, again, just fade out this right hand side now, ever so slightly, like so. And then let's move on to then the next shadow, which is this rock here, I believe, on the left hand side. Now what we'll do is we'll swipe it to the left hand side and duplicate it. Again, on the second one, we go to our cursor, we flip it vertically, and if I zoom in, we position this somewhat so that at least this right hand side you can see matches up to our shadow, because we're going to distort it anyway. We're going to swipe that to the left hand side just to get the angle right. And because this is a rock, and it's not a straight sort of small base, you're going to have to grab this handle here maybe and just sort of match up this edge of this rock. And then you'll end up with something like that. But once we go to our adjustments and Gaussian blur and layer again, we blur it out, creating that 3 to 4% blur, and then hit the adjustments. And I'm actually happy with exactly that. We've added actually more shadow to this edge of the rock, which actually fits in with our design more. So if I zoom out, we now get a nice casted shadow from the rock as well. Let's repeat the process for this rock then. A small one, we can then go to that layer, and I'll move my canvas so we can see. And then on that layer, we simply swipe it to the left hand side and duplicate it. On the second one, we now go to our cursor, we flip it vertically, drag it down, and then using the distort tool, we drag this handle out first, and then we can position it where we want it so that the edges of the rock match up, like so. And then the same principle, let's go to our adjustments, let's go to Gaussian blur and layer, and then from left to right, I'm just going to add in that 3% shadow there. And that is our sort of landscape scene done. We just now need to add in a shadow for our elephants. So let's go to our elephant layers and let's go to the next one, turn it on and off. It's this elephant on the left hand side. So let's swipe him to the left hand side and duplicate. Let's go to the second one out of the two. Let's go to our cursor. We're going to flip it vertically, drag it down into position until the feet are somewhat touching one another. And again, using the distort, now we don't have to drag this one too far out. We can just create a sort of somewhat shadow like this. And because the elephant's sort of feet are nice and sort of flat in the design, we can go ahead and go straight into our adjustments and blur and layer. And let's add in that 3% blur again. And for this one, I will add in a mask on this one just to blur the edge out ever so slightly and soften it. So we're going to go to the layer and we're going to tap on it and we're going to go to mask. And same principle, go straight to your brush library and use the soft brush. And I'm just going to soften out this edge ever so slightly, like so. And then what I might do is I might actually just lower this one ever so slightly down in opacity, just so it's slightly different to the elephant itself above. So dropping it down to about 70%, we end up with our shadow for that elephant. And let's move on to the final one. If we go to our layers and we go to this elephant here and swipe it to the left hand side and duplicate it. The second one, we simply go to our cursor, we flip it vertically. We then drag it down into position until at least some of the feet are somewhat touching. And then we're going to go to the distort and just grab this handle and just create the angled shadow we need to create for the elephant. And then what you might have to do is just grab this anchor here and just drag it up so that the feet all match and touch up to the shadow. And then we're done with aligning that. And then the same rules apply really. We can go to our adjustments, we can go to Gaussian blur and layer. And then add the same value of gradient of Gaussian blur, so roughly about that 3.2%. And then if we go to our layers, I want to add a mask to it. So let's tap on the layer and then give it a mask. And then on that mask, continuing with the soft airbrush selected, we just want to, in a circular motion, just blur that edge out ever so slightly. And then we got a nice soft looking shadow. And just like the other one, let's lower the shadow opacity down to 70%. And then if we zoom out, the final touch that I'd like to add is some birds up in the sky. So we're going to go to our layers and tap on the very top one and create a new layer. And then with this color here in the bottom right selected, we're going to go to our flight. And we're going to tap on the screen and then we will get our selection of birds. And you may want to go to your cursor icon now and just simply maybe rotate or maybe scale your birds accordingly, and then just drag them up into position up into the top right here, like so. And then that completes today's design. If you enjoyed this tutorial, drop a like down below and sub to the channel if you'd like some weekly Procreate content. As always, be sure to share your designs with me on Instagram and TikTok. Links are both in the description down below. And as always, a huge shout out to my Patreons. If you're after exclusive Joel Create content such as extra tutorials, access to our Facebook group and our Discord, which is coming soon, there's a link in the description down below so you can show your support over there. And I'll see you in the next one.